I feel like it just makes me sound old between the gray hair, the gray beard, and yeah, let's pull this up. All right, so yeah, as I mentioned, my name is Piero. You've clearly figured out I'm American already, despite my very Italian name. And I work out of the security and risk business unit for ServiceNow. And to lay some context, a lot of times when people think of ServiceNow, they think of ticketing, or a lot of IT ticketing functionality. And where ServiceNow really built a platform, and the first thing that we built on that platform was IT ticketing. And several years ago, we decided to expand into some other areas that were adjacent to IT. And those areas include things like human resource onboarding. So as new employees come on, there's tasks that need to get done, and things like customer service management. And the area that's important to all of you are things around being able to help security teams respond to security incidents and vulnerabilities more easily, as well as working with some governance, risk, and compliance, because these are all tasks that need to happen, and there's some better ways of doing it. And so we start here with, we did some research with an organization called the Ponemon Institute. And we're going to go a little bit into that research, and we'll talk some specifically about the global findings, and they're remarkably the same in a lot of different areas. And then I'll call out a few places where the Australian and New Zealand market kind of stood out from some of the other research. But what I'll do is I'll go over the methodology we used for doing the research, and then get into the three key findings. And and I'll almost jumping to the end here with these, but we'll talk about them in more detail, is that the findings are, first, the teams that are managing the vulnerability response process are overwhelmed. There's just tons of data, there's lots of different work, and those teams are all looking to hire more people. And we know how hard it is to hire. We'll talk about that more in a bit. The second is something that we call the patching paradox. And there's so much manual process being used within the patching process that sometimes even adding more people may not actually help, because you've got a set of manual processes that aren't able to keep up with the demand. And then finally, the single most important attribute in terms of being able to prevent a breach is effectiveness in patching. And it seems like a very obvious statement for all of us, but we've got some data to kind of back that up. And hopefully this will be some data that you can use as you're going to work with your own organizations on trying to make sure you get enough resources for managing the vulnerability response process. And finally, we'll go over some recommendations. And we'll talk a little bit about how what a good vulnerability response process looks like. So a little bit on the methodology, because I think this is really important. So this was, again, done by a group called the Ponemon Institute. And they've been doing primary research, talking to enterprises for years. And that primary research is typically done via interviews or via surveys. And a lot of their research has been focused on just data breaches in general, but looking for things like, what is the cost of a data breach? How much does it cost per record? And looking at trends over time. And so we asked them about doing some work around the state of vulnerability response. And a lot of this is due to, we keep reading about breaches in the news, and we wanted to go and dig in a little bit more on why. And so the survey took place really the very end of January, and then and through into February. And we were able to get to just under 3,000 security professionals around the world, and we focused in on these nine areas. Now, the other caveat here is we made sure that all of the responses were for organizations that had 1,000 or more people. So essentially wanted to focus in on the enterprise side versus the small to medium business. And this would gave us some pretty interesting data around the way that these different organizations are working. And so as you can see here, we got relatively good cuts and across the world. The most important thing, I actually didn't, when we started this project, I didn't know we were going to get to so many people. And when we got to this just under 3,000, you really started to feel like this is statistically significant. Especially when we started looking around, the differences between the UK and Japan, the difference between Australia and New Zealand and the US. They weren't all that different because the numbers got so high, but there were some areas that we'll call out. And so the first one, the other part that's been great about getting to this many organizations is that we're able to cut up this data in a few different ways. And so the first is that when we looked at those 2,900 respondents, 48% of them responded back that they had had a data breach in the past 2 years. When we look at that number just for Australia and New Zealand, the number is actually higher. It was 52%. So still within the range, but a little bit higher. And over a 2-year period, in some respects, we don't hear about this in the news every day of organizations getting breached, but over a 2-year period, this number feels about right. But to the general populace, we hear about an organization being breached, it ends up in the news, and then the next one happens in a few weeks. And so just the things that are getting reported are really just the tip of the iceberg. They're really just the beginning of this, and data breaches are actually occurring pretty much all the time. Other thing we saw, and this is from some other data that we pulled from Ponemon, is that for as little as even 10,000 records being stolen, the impact can be just short of $3 million US. And this is this could be credit card data, it could be personal identifiable information, it could be healthcare records, etc. And so just the importance of protecting against data breaches could never be higher. Now, this is another really interesting one. And first is that unpatched vulnerabilities were the leading cause of breaches. And so as we started to get into how these things happen, you started to look for things like, is it an insider threat? Was it brute force? Was it a 0-day? But vulnerabilities that had not been patched yet was the number one reason why a particular data breach happened. 57% of the breach victims were breached due to a vulnerability where a patch was already available. And the flip side of this is that 34% of organizations were breached, and there was a patch available, and they actually knew they had the vulnerability and simply hadn't done the work yet. And to the C-suite, many times, especially the people outside of security, they'll say, but it's a vulnerability. How could you have not patched it? If it was one machine on one system, it'd be very easy. When you start getting into hundreds or thousands of different machines that all have uptime, and you've got IT owners that want to be able to work, they want to make sure that their services are going to be available, this becomes enormously more complex. But the fact that the 34% of organizations knew they had a vulnerability, knew the patch was available, hadn't done it yet, and gotten breached was maybe a little bit higher than we would have thought. Now in Australia and New Zealand, that number was actually a little bit higher. It was actually 37%. But this is why just patching quickly is so important. We saw the average time for when a critical vulnerability is announced and when a patch actually is being deployed is 20 days, and that's 20 days from the time. That's a 20-day window where there's that patch Tuesday, or pick another vendor when they do announce their software vulnerabilities. The race is on, right? You're patching on average in 20 days, and how fast can someone write a exploit against that particular vulnerability, and then put that out onto the black market for someone to then go use and weaponize, and then go and look for holes. But patching is super important. And I mentioned from the beginning, one of the key things we found is that security teams were overwhelmed and looking to hire more people. Now, 64% of organizations were looking to hire additional staff specifically to manage the vulnerability and patching process. So just a little under 2/3. That number was very consistent, and in fact, in Australia and New Zealand, that number came out exactly the same. And of the organizations that were looking for more people, they said they were spending on average about 320 hours per week managing the patching process. So essentially about 8 full-time people every week working on the vulnerability response and patching process. And those organizations that were looking to hire are actually looking to find 50% more people to go do the work. So the equivalent of 4 headcount. multiply that across all these different organizations, and granted, those numbers will be smaller or larger depending on the size of organization. Finding those people is going to be really difficult. So maybe good news for all of us in terms of our security careers is that there's going to be demand for us for a long time. But the idea that we've got to go hire 50% more people to solve a very current problem was a little bit staggering. But hiring may not actually be practical. Where this is a report from ISACA that came out actually about a year ago, and what they found is that they were expecting that there's going to be a 2 million person shortage globally of security professionals compared to open jobs. And there's some really great statistics out there that may actually quite help us all in our next salary negotiations. There's things like Indeed.com is a global site for job postings, and in the U.S. There was, of every 10 job postings, only 6.7 actually received a click, meaning that a third of all job postings no one even actually clicked on to go look at. And those numbers are actually worse outside globally, or when you pull out the U.S. numbers. Those numbers end up being about a third of, or about 3 of every 10 job postings are actually only being clicked on. So over 70% of security jobs no one's even looking at. And so this is the point I'm trying to make here is that hiring more people, yes, you may be able to hire some people. Finding those people, retaining those people, keeping those people is going to be extremely challenging, especially if you're looking to add more people into a particular process. And so the other part about hiring people is that it may not actually help that much when you're using a lot of manual process. Just adding more people into processes that may not be efficient may not be the best use of deploying smart security professionals. So first, 73% of organizations were between security and IT, they didn't have a common view of assets and applications. So meaning when the security team went to go find something, they find a vulnerability, and most of the time they pass that work to someone on the IT side to do the patching. And they're speaking completely different language, where security teams live in a world of IP addresses, and IT has a lot of context on the system, who owns the system, what applications are running the system, maybe what business services are associated with them. But security and IT typically aren't actually looking at the same thing. And 73% of the respondents said that they literally did not have access to the same data. The second one here is that 62% said that once they sent a patching request, they actually can't track if it's being done in a timely manner. And this is, again, because most of the time organizations are using things like emails and spreadsheets to manage this process. We've bought great vulnerability scanning products. We've bought patching tools. But the way that we communicate on those is using things like emails and spreadsheets. I've talked to a Fortune 10 company who literally has a person whose job is managing the spreadsheet. When the things come in, they take they've got the spreadsheet that goes to the Windows team, another spreadsheet that goes to a Unix team, another spreadsheet that goes to a different application team, et cetera. And just the amount of time wasted in that process is staggering. And because of using things like emails and spreadsheets, we've seen that 57% of the respondents of the survey said that things are slipping through the cracks due to these manual processes. And what we've seen here now, and this is where there's just a great opportunity to be able to be more efficient than using some different tools. But the net result of this is that the silos between teams, the manual processes that most organizations are using, are causing a 12-day delay on every patch. And so we start looking at that time when a vulnerability is announced, a patch is made available. Malware authors are starting to write an exploit, and they've got a 12-day head start on us. And even though we're getting stuff on average patched within 20 days, you start looking at those two different windows. There's definitely a window of time where malware authors can definitely take advantage. And why the broken processes hurt. The other part of this is that as we start looking at the way that organizations are passing vulnerable items over to patching teams, they're lacking the prioritization. So 65% said it was difficult to prioritize what needed to be done first. Most organizations use things like the CVSS score, and that's the primary or maybe even only way that we're looking at vulnerabilities. There are other aspects of what the system is that can be used in those types of in that type of environment. 61% said that manual processes put them at a disadvantage when actually patching vulnerabilities because it took them too long. And another or 55% said that they actually spent more time navigating manual process than actually doing the work. So just the work of trying to coordinate between teams was taking longer than the act of actually doing that work. But you start looking at these 12 days. This is that 12-day head start when the hacker can get started. This right here was the most staggering statistic in the entire report, and this is found that there were 37% of organizations around the world that were not actually doing regular scanning. All of you here, you're spending the time working with AusCERT. You're clearly doing this, but this is widely available technology that's been around for a very long time. I was joking with a customer earlier this week that I went to my first patching conference in 2002. The problem in some respects is exactly the same as it was then. The complexity, the order of magnitude, how good the malware authors are today is a lot of what's changed. And clearly having more data sitting in clouds and disparate systems has made the problem exponentially harder. But it's the same fundamental problem of finding software vulnerabilities and getting them patched. But things like not scanning for vulnerabilities on a regular basis, it was staggering that there were this many companies of sizes that were 1,000 employees and up were actually not doing that. And the thing we found is that those who did not scan paid the price, right? So that you start looking at just the simple act of scanning. So this is another great way of cutting up this data. The fact that you are scanning versus not scanning reduced your breach risk by 20%. So it doesn't mean that scanning is the only thing that you're scanning, everything's going to be great, but the simple act of scanning versus not scanning literally reduces risk by 20%. And so we're able, this is again from cutting up that data of looking at organizations who were breached and not breached and how or if they were scanning. And so if you ever get, if your organization ever just comes to you and says, should we really be spending all this money doing scanning for software, this stat alone could help you justify it. So 56% of those who were breached or that didn't scan were breached, and 45% that did were. So we wanted to know one of the things, the different attributes that would help would indicate why some organizations were breached and others weren't. And so we asked them around a number of different security and IT tactics on how they were managing this work. And so we asked all the survey respondents to rate their abilities in a number of key areas on a scale from 1 to 10. And then we divided them into the two groups where there's those who hadn't been breached and those who were, and compare what they said. And so this goes back to the third point I made at the very beginning of just the fact that the ability to patch and being good at vulnerabilities was the single most impactful way of being able to stop this stuff. And so the companies that were not breached rated themselves 41% better at patching than those who were breached. And so this is just taking that subset of the 67% or 63% of organizations that were patching on a regular basis. But just the ones who are patching well and rated themselves as being good ended up having significantly less breaches. This may be this makes sense moment, but these are just some numbers that you can use as you're justifying your own work within your company. Now the next impactful statistic was actually detecting vulnerabilities. So then this is clearly feeding in the work for doing the patching. The gap there was not as high. It was 19%, so still significant, but that was the second most impactful statistic between the two. Clearly, we were doing a study on patching and finding vulnerabilities, so some of this makes a little bit of sense. But we asked them a lot of different questions about IT hygiene as part of this, so they didn't know this was going to be all about just patching. And so just the patching on a timely basis just ends up being that single most effective thing that organizations can do. And so we talked a little bit about broken process, and from that, using manual process for doing these things, and it's hard to hire. We need to go find more people. We're not going to go find all the people we want to go do that work. We had 5 recommendations that organizations could take away to be able to be a little bit better at this. And so the first one is the recommendation is to take a very unbiased look at where you are today. A lot of patching programs were introduced many years ago, have not gone through a lot of iteration, but take that unbiased look of how you're doing, and then evaluate how you stack up against the capabilities in the survey around those 3 areas around patching hygiene. If you can identify problem areas and then prioritize them based on the risks they create, for example, introducing delays or different things into the vulnerability response process, are there places where you can speed things up? And so just looking at that end-to-end process and take that unbiased view of where you are is the first place to start. The second one is looking for some of the low-hanging fruit, or looking for places where you can have a lot of impact without a lot of work. And so this is where, for example, if your scanning processes are not going that well, just the ability to improve on the scanning side will be able to help you improve in that area a ton. Or just things like getting having access to some of the same data. And this really takes us into the third one, which is around breaking down the different data silos between security and IT. Security and IT, the work is typically, the scanning work's done by security. The work for patching is typically done by IT. Getting those 2 teams to look at data on the same system, so they're speaking the same language, so that you can use things like what the asset is as one of the factors, not just looking at the CVSS score, but getting IT and security to understand, just because IT has just really rich information: who owns it, what systems are running on it. Security in many cases is flying blind and making recommendations on a large spreadsheet of patch all of this because it's important. This can help whittle down the work into things that are a little bit more manageable. The other thing, that by getting IT and security looking at the same data, is you can start to ensure, besides the prioritization side, is start to ensure that patching requests are going to the right teams. Many times that in some of those manual processes, and in those 12 days lost as teams are moving those things around, it's because security is sending a spreadsheet with a ton of different vulnerable items to go patch, and they send it off to one team, and then that work actually has to get farmed out to a whole bunch of others, or maybe even some of them went to the wrong people. So it's getting access to that same data can really help. The fourth is starting to look at taking the overall process and first getting it documented. A lot of times we've got a patching process, we've got a vulnerability scanning process, but we haven't looked at it end to end in terms of what are all the steps that need to happen from the time a vulnerability is found to when we rescan to make sure that vulnerability is no longer present. And just getting that process documented is step one. And then from within that process, then look for places to potentially automate some of that work. Maybe there are steps within the process that make sense for when something's done for a task or something to automatically happen, so the next person in line in that workflow or in that journey for getting the vulnerability patch is automatically notified. Again, this is trying to get away from doing all this stuff manually. This can really help with making sure that organizations are using the same methodology no matter who is actually working on that. So you've got consistent processes across the entire team. And then finally, when you start to leverage these different advances and start to get things out of spreadsheets and get them into systems so people automatically receive work versus cutting and pasting things out of spreadsheets into other tools, this is a great way to start to build more of a high-performance culture within the security team. I would say that none of us got into security to cut and paste things from one system to another and wait for verdicts. We actually want to solve problems, and there's areas where that we can use automation to do some of the manual work, and then use our brain to make decisions, and then potentially use automation to help that work actually get solved. And as we're starting to face a lot of competition for hiring resources and getting new team members and retaining team members. This is a great way of getting new junior security members up to speed faster, because you've got processes to put them into versus trying to teach them a manual way or teaching tribal knowledge. It's also a great way of retaining staff, because as they go and look for their next job or their next opportunity, the job at the other company where they're going to be doing a lot of cutting and pasting and manual process just may not be as attractive to the work that they're doing today. And so we really think of automating a lot of the work around risk and security is really the future of the way that security teams are going to start working. And I personally, sometimes the word automation in a security realm scares me, because I look at things like some problem is going to be found, and something is, some magical buzzword. If someone says AI to me, I just want to punch them in the mouth. But if there's a problem is found, and something magical is going to make that automatically get fixed, and we as security people are just going to watch it happen and report. I mean, yes, there's probably some use cases in technology where that would be totally legitimate, but the vast majority of the time, it's wrought for false positives, it's wrought for errors, and it's wrought for downtime when you don't want it. But there are ways within a process that automation can really help. And so there's definitely some things we're seeing around automation in the market overall that's really helping organizations think about getting better at this stuff. Some stuff to help you as you talk about automation within your own organizations is, first, Forrester named security automation its #3 overall technology trend for 2018. And this is not security trend, this is actually technology trends. And so things like IoT ended up in this on this same list. And so it just shows you a little bit of the importance of where automation can play in the security market. The second is that Gartner in November of 2017 defined the security automation market as SOAR, or Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response. And this is the first definition of taking, and it created a market definition around how ingestion of security alerts is going to happen, and vulnerability data is going to happen. Things like abstraction layers, allowing you to switch out different security tools really easily, but keep a lot of the same processes in there. It's actually a really great report they call it Innovation Insights, and this was our first definition of the market ahead of starting to really write about critical capabilities and ultimately helping you select vendors. But this market is just getting started. If you're as we're having this talk, as you're thinking, I use manual process, I use spreadsheets and email. 99% of organizations around the world are doing that today. Their estimation is that less than 1% of companies are actually doing this work. And they estimate that this is going to grow to 15% of enterprises by the end of 2020. So it's definitely something that organizations are beginning to take a look at. And then CSO had one of their cyber predictions for 2018 was using automation specifically around doing work around threat intelligence. And I always think of threat intelligence as being some of the best work to get started on with automation, because this is literally taking contents of a phishing email or looking up an IP address and dumping that into a sandbox and waiting for the malware to detonate, waiting for the answer back, is it malicious or not? This is stuff that can really easily be automated, and then you'll be able to get the information at the end to say, is this bad or good, or do I need to take action? And so just seeing a really good use case on automation can be really helpful. And then, actually, the thing I should put back up here, one of the things people love to jump to automation. I always argue that you've got to get the basics right. So getting that end-to-end process before you look for places to automate. So if you're excited about automation, just make sure you document everything first along the way. And just a quick model of how you can do this, right, is you take your vulnerability scanning data. This is examples of folks like Tenable, Qualys, and Rapid7. Have that get integrated into a single place. Then automatically prioritize from there. And this is where you can prioritize based on things like CVSS score and then what that asset is. So this is where you marry security and IT data together. And even things like is there an exploit in the wild? That's another great factor that can help with prioritization. And then, once you've decided which vulnerable items you want to work on first, then automate that change request. Getting either a request to go into a team, and then that team can use whatever tools that they need to use to be able to patch that vulnerability. So things like BigFix or SCCM or other patching tools can be really helpful here. And coordinate the change window. If you can really start to get the prioritization to be stronger around more than just CVSS score, you can get a smaller number that maybe you're going to do out of band. Maybe it's worth 3 minutes of downtime right now to get a critical vulnerability done because of how important this one system is. And then you do coordinated change planning for the rest during maintenance windows. And then finally, when IT says, okay, we deployed the patch, that's great. But the other thing you can do is actually trigger rescans. So when that's done, go back to the vulnerability scanner, whichever one or multiple you're using, and actually confirm that the vulnerability is gone. Then you've got a closed loop end-to-end process of vulnerability found, vulnerability patched, vulnerability confirmed to no longer be present. And so that's a little bit what we want to talk about. We can talk about how ServiceNow does a lot of this stuff over our stand, but happy to take any questions folks have now, or I'll stand up here a little bit afterwards if anyone wants to talk privately.
Yeah, so thanks. So we'll take questions. I've got a mic here to hand around. So, was that a question? Sorry.
Yeah, got a couple of questions. One is, did you? I might have missed it, but did you have the slide from the research that looked at the rate of breaches for the companies that were effective at patching compared to those that weren't? And similarly, was there any stats on system stability with those that were proactive and mature in their patching process compared to those that were a bit more relaxed with it?
Yeah, it didn't get anything. It was very much focused on kind of binary breach or not breach versus looking at the system stability. But that's another system stability would be another great factor, just because you start having vulnerabilities piling up, or even the flip side of that is that you could end up with patches that get deployed too quickly. There's a lot of great Spectre and Meltdown examples of the people who patched really quickly and saw really big performance issues. I'm not sure I really understand the first part of your question.
Oh, just whether there was any sort of stats that came out from the research on the reduction in the sort of quantitative reduction in breaches for the companies that were effective and mature in their patching.
Yeah, it was the ones who were rated themselves mature as patching were seeing a 20% reduction in the likelihood of being breached.
Any other questions? Sorry, any other questions?
So yeah, I guess one of the challenges that I've had at University of Queensland, where I work, is that the security team will they look at the severity of the vulnerability team, but they don't always have great context to actually be able to translate that into like a business risk. So they kind of go to the operational teams and with this message that you must fix this now, and sometimes it's not really true because the actual business risk is quite low. So those teams kind of go, do we have to drop everything now and fix it?
Yeah, well, this is where goes back to getting security and IT to actually use some of the same data, because you may have on the IT side a configuration management database that says what everything is, and you can start to look at if this particular system is down, what does that cost my, what does it cost my organization, or what kind of risk does it pose if this particular system is vulnerable? So this is where the marrying of CVSS score with context and being able to do that automatically, and frankly, the security side can actually provide a lot of great context of discovering assets and actually making a configuration management database even more complete as well. That's where just getting that data together so that when security is sending information over, they can actually use some of that IT context to help reduce that number down, so that they're asking about 5 systems, not 50, in terms of getting the work done, and they'll be much more likely to get it done. But getting that business risk view of the work is critically important.
Thanks for the question, Mark. We have time for one more. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay. Let's thank Piero, please, for presenting this morning.
Thank you.